Welcome. Today we're going to talk about transient fault handling and how it's implemented in all of our AzStudio APIs. AzStudio APIs use the Poly transient fault handling libraries, which can be found on NuGet and are open source. We generally don't use the PAS transient fault handling policy that may be built into whatever system you're trying to access because AzStudio's primary goal is portability. We don't know whether our target is going to be an on-site, an on-prem resource, a Microsoft Azure resource, or some other resource that you may have connected to. Therefore, we'd like to have our transient fault handling in one place, portable, and consistent in its implementation. So let's open up our transient fault handling editor. Now you'll notice, in this particular case, the transient fault handling tile did not display itself. That's because it's a submenu inside CAS, but that's okay. We found it over here in Settings. So we'll click that and it'll launch our plugin anyway. So, transient fault handling is pretty simple. It's divided out by policy name, the shortcut name you'd like to use when accessing this policy, the actual policy itself, which there isn't much to see here. We'll edit in just a minute. And then what environment that policy is going to apply to. Now the reason connection environment ID is important is that you may want to have different transient fault handling for your API to be more aggressive or even non-existent for a particular environment. But when it goes into production, you may want to retry many more times with much more give in your API call than you would normally have in QA or dev. If you implement an API that uses AzStudio Common, then you have access to this policy editor and the policy data by default. So if you decide to create your own APIs or have your own libraries and you want to standardize on one place to edit all of your policy, your retry policy information and make it consistent across all environments, well, this is the place to do it. To edit a policy, it's pretty simple. You just go into our property editor and then select your retry time span in milliseconds and then add or delete members or modify them as you see fit. Once you've done that, your policy is applied. Now you'll notice we have a standard retry policy, which is standard. The reason that we have the standard policy in place is that if the policy you request through whatever shortcut is not available for the connection environment that the API is currently connected to, this policy will be what happens by default. So it's not even necessary for you to kick in different policy names and configure them. You can simply modify the standard retry policy, and that policy will apply across all environments and all APIs. It's not as nuanced as, say, using named ones, but it does mean that you will have a policy at all times. The downside is don't delete this. The standard retry policy is necessary for the system to work. However, were you to delete this, this standard retry policy is also hard-coded into the retry policy engine, and you'd still get back something. The system won't fail if this data is deleted. Once you create a policy and policy shortcut, you can highlight it and then create copy to new environment to quickly apply it to different environments. Then you can go into each record really easily and just change what numbers you want for each environment. Generally, we here at Monza only change things when we're doing things in prod. Now let's look at some code that's using the Poly retry engine in C#. This is a really simple example. Basically, you create a policy before your method call gets called. You'll notice that we have a policy manager already in AZ. You get your poly time spans, and you pass in the shortcut name. That's all you have to do. Of note is this exception handling AZ log, which we wrote an exception extension to handle smooth logging of exceptions whenever we have to deal with those. At that point, you just execute. Very, very simple stuff. Policy Manager caches. So this is a really fast call after the first query. That's really all there is to it. Once you've wrapped this policy with whatever handling or whatnot you want in it, executing is really dead simple. And that's it for transient fault handling. We wish we could make it more complicated, I guess, but there really isn't much more to it. We do want to explain again that we lift this functionality out of the PAS environment itself because we want to make it portable. Once you use this policy editor and the code we just showed you, your code will be transportable between will transport between different environments, and you don't need to rewrite. And you always know where your policies are going to be, no matter what. Thanks for listening.